So I'm an immunologist by training. I got my PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, attended Lafayette College before that, and as a bachelor's in biology. I worked at the Dana-Farber as a technician. I worked at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm for half a year, came back for the PhD program, postdoc at the Wistar. I had a faculty position at Drexel, which at the time was Allegheny University of the Health Sciences. Don't know if you remember all that, but it's Allegheny went bankrupt with Sharif Abdahak stealing and his groups, and they were the largest private employer in Pennsylvania at the time. So off I went out of academia. I had some funding, but I didn't have enough. You needed two R01s to stay as a faculty member with the Drexel conversion, which was very few, to be honest with you. Drexel's still a much, much smaller research institute than it was before its bankruptcy. So I went into medical education where I worked with big pharma to explain oncology products and how to use them more safely to physicians, pharmacists, and nurses, which is where I learned how to speak English and science at the same time, which is not always that easy. And because the product managers, they were MBAs, they did understand their product very well. I'm sure many of you have worked with the industry context there, but they don't really understand the full biology and the breadth. And explaining to them how their product could impact other systems, getting them comfortable to talk to their own scientists and helping them. So sometimes I'd even have opportunities to intervene when they're trying to talk to their clinical folks and so that was really an interesting kind of the relationship building there was wonderful, but in fact, it was pretty boring because what we were doing was just talking about safety and there was nothing new going on. I did help bring thalidomide and educate people around thalidomide for multiple myeloma, and then I did the same for their cell genes follow-up product with Revlimid. I worked with Genentech with their antibody Rituxan, which actually I cloned when I was a technician at the Dana-Farber. So it's funny in life to go from seeing the product produced in the plate to all the way to the market. That was quite a nice experience. So having those kind of experiences allowed me to sort of understand a little bit about where the end goals of businesses might be. And one of my colleagues, her name was Debbie Mayo, she became a VP at I think Shire, if I recall correctly, told me that every day I show up to work and every day the boss says no for some new idea I had. And she said, you should go talk to George Prendergast at the Lincoln Institute for Medical Research, and he'll say yes. And I called him, I had a beer. 2 weeks later, we had dinner, and 3 weeks later, I was in a new job. So I created a biotech incubator where we embedded technologies and companies into the laboratories of the existing researchers. We actually got an IRS letter saying that we could use this charitable space for this for-profit activity as long as the companies were working towards finding solutions to diseases that were in of the patients at Lincoln Hospital, which was the mission of the institute. So that's where I started to understand and learn all the problems and issues facing these early stage companies. And I started to work to create an ecosystem in Philadelphia. The Proof of Concept Fund for QED that was at the Science Center. Some of you probably were advisors to that. Was a program I was a consultant for and worked with Chris Lang. I created a program with him called Phase One Ventures, which was an investment in the companies to validate them via typically phase one SPIR grant, but it could be early stage investment. I also worked with early on with a group called Biostrategy Partners, which is actually interesting, and I'll share a little bit more about that. But it's an academic consortia, and it involves Temple University, Fox Chase, of course, is now part of Temple, Jefferson, Wistar Institute, Children's Hospital, Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, and Penn State. And actually, because Chris Lang liked what Biostrategy Partners was doing so much, and he's at Duke National University of Singapore, he asked if he could join from as an overseas member. So that's kind of cool. So that creating an ecosystem is why I became of interest to Temple, because in fact, Temple needs a functioning ecosystem for our technologies to advance. Investors, entrepreneurs, engaged community, collaborations, looking for everybody's got to be in the now University of Pennsylvania, where I did my PhD, doesn't need that in the same way because they have enough going on in their own unit uh, that they get a lot of attention and they have sufficient resources to grow technologies and they can attract all that. So this consortia actually turned out to be a pretty nifty concept. So that having these experiences in ecosystem generation got me the job at Temple, where I became new ventures officer. And as of 3 days ago, I am now executive director of the Innovation Nest. That and Mick was up at the Innovation Nest, one of our very earliest. We've only been there for 3 weeks. We've got a certificate of occupancy 3 or 4 weeks ago and moved in. It's on the fourth floor of the dental school. So sorry for that very long introduction, but I think it helps a little bit to understand the various backgrounds and experiences that I've had, why I can walk into a faculty's space, having been a faculty member, and talk to them about their research, but start have empathy for their struggles. At the same time, having worked with early stage companies, understanding the entrepreneur struggles with launching a company when I was at Lankenau, and then talking to the end user, the pharma companies and other people who are, because we have most of our technologies are in the scientific side of things, healthcare related. I can have conversations with the folks at pharma, knowing a little bit more about their culture, although each company is a little different, as you all know. So what, I'm going to just slide you guys up a little bit so I can see so this in general is the process by which technologies come in to our office and then move forward into commercialization. And we take, by the way, any monies that come into our offices through licenses and royalties is directly put back into research. We don't use it. There's no bonuses for folks who do this work. We don't get paid for the size of our licenses. We get paid straight salary. Didn't want to incent people to try to make this more painful than it already is for everybody participating. So we want to make sure. But the goal is, and this next slide will tell you how this happened to come about. So are you guys familiar with the Bayh-Dole Act? Mick and others, I can explain what that is a little bit.
I think it'd be good if you explained it a bit, Todd. Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Thanks, Andy. So the Bayh-Dole Act gave this. So this is Birch Bayh and Bob Dole, a relatively liberal Democrat and a relatively conservative. It's hard to measure in today's politics, but who created an act that gave the universities ownership of the intellectual property created by their faculty if they receive federal funding. Actually, federal funding becomes part of almost every project anyway. So really it became sort of a universal ownership. There are rare exceptions. So they give us ownership, but they require by law for us to commercialize those inventions. So because we receive public funding, that we need to bring these technologies to market for the benefit of the public. As you can hear, that's an unfunded mandate. So what we've tried to do with our leadership at the university is to tell them, don't look at this as a cash cow. This is not what's happening here. We're obligated to try to commercialize. We do not know the value of these technologies, but no matter what, we're obligated to try to commercialize. They also have a significant reporting requirement, which is very daunting through a thing called iEdison. So every time a patent is a change in the patent, whether it goes to a PCT, which is the international, or it gets licensed or it gets commercial, we have to report that to the government. So we actually had to hire a person to do this full time. We got a little delinquent. So failure to meet the obligations for reporting they'll stop providing federal funding. And at Temple, because of the size of I'm sure you all know, but we're a publicly supported institution. We have about $330 million of research expenditures, certainly the second largest in the city by far. But it is also because of our tuition levels being relatively low, we don't have a lot of excess administrative capacity. So we started to run afoul of the federal reporting requirements, and we got delayed and delayed, and we hired someone to get us out from this because they were becoming frustrated. Hey, why aren't you reporting on all of these new inventions or the processes? And as you can imagine, we have and I'll share this a little bit later, but we have a company called Excision Biotherapeutics. It's a CRISPR-based technology for cutting out HIV and other integrated viruses. They licensed 60 patents from us. So every one of them has to be reported. So you can imagine the portfolio can be quite daunting. But and they have walk-in rights. I don't know if you saw the news the other day, but Biden was talking about using walk-in rights on organizations if they were I think it had to do with certain kinds of expenditures. And it's never happened. So I doubt that it would actually be. It's more of a threat. There may have been one time since 1980 that the federal government said, "Hey, you're not developing something that's really valuable. We're gonna walk in." So that's how we got into this business. Now you can see it's 1980. We really didn't get started at Temple until the early 2000s. So and then that was hit and miss. Steve Nappy is my boss. And he hired me 10 years ago. We received a check from Baxter Pharmaceuticals for $10 million as payment for a sublicense to Onconova, one of our spin-out companies that occurred before I joined. And that money gave us a proof of concept fund and allowed us to hire a few people to begin the process. So we went from 2 or 3 companies over the first 20 years of Bidol to we now have 29 active companies. I think I've created about 45 in total. So that's the big picture. So going back to the slide, are you guys interested in hearing about how the technologies, how do we find out about the things that are going on? I can walk through that quite quickly. So Andy, is that something of reason?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
so we try to engage with our faculty around things that might be commercializable. So what we do is first we look at what new funding comes into there's a database. Every day I get an email from my boss or from the database telling me, oh, someone else got a grant. So one, I look about that grant. So I get to understand what the faculty is doing from a research perspective. Secondly, we do a variety of kinds of outreach. We go to departments and present what tech transfer is and say, here's who we are. But ultimately, the inventor needs to disclose to us any invention. That's the law as well. It's an obligation they have, but convincing them to do it, it's because you don't know what you don't know. So we ask them to provide a disclosure, and that disclosure asks them to list the number of inventors. Is there anybody from not who's like in a collaboration, say a Penn? That process leads us to do an evaluation about whether it's been invented, and whether it's patentable. So about a third, we get about 80 disclosures per year at Temple. About a third of them have already been invented by somebody. And we'll tell them there's great research. Obviously, it's great research. This other guy over at Wisconsin or Michigan or somebody, hey, they've invented this. Or they made a mistake and they published before they disclosed to us. That would make it public. So we can't file patents on things that are in the public domain. So that's a part why outreach is important. And then the third thing we do is, even if it is patentable, that we try to figure out whether there's a market for it, and in that case, we would go to people like yourselves and ask them, hey, do you think it's something that would do X, Y, and Z be interesting? Do you think there's a market for it? Do you think there are investors? We might go talk to some pharma folks, or we might talk to others and say, what do you think? Formerly, in the old days, we used to do this with a big conference group in a big conference room and have quarterly meetings. But frankly, that were pretty wasteful for our colleagues' times, because they would only have one or two technologies that would be in their field, and they would be coming in and listening to 25 other presentations that were completely boring for them. So we ended up doing this more informally by sending them little descriptions and asking them, hey, what do you think? So, but if it is a great idea and there is a market for it, and we do think this is something, and we tend to be pretty liberal in this interpretation, right? Because we'd rather file than regret. So we file a PCT. Typically, first we'll do a provisional patent. That gives us a year, but it also protects us to do international filings. But it has to be pretty complete now. In the old days, you used to just put like a title and the concept, and you could put it in a provisional. But because so many countries are now requiring a full description of the invention that you need, and in your provisional, and claim sets about what you're claiming that it will do, that we have moved towards actually fully providing a pretty full provisional. It cost about $5,000 to $10,000 for each provisional. But it used to be cheaper, but then you spend the money later when you convert it to a PCT, which is via the International Patent Treaty that allows us to file internationally and US all at once. And then we wait for each of these different agencies to get back to us. So by the way, intellectual property isn't just patents. Obviously, copyrights and trademarks, and we have a fair amount of copyrights around software. So, and they're important, but they obviously are a different sort of protection. And by the way, I'm sure you guys all know this, but if any of you are taking notes for whatever reason today, those notes are copyrighted. They're yours. It's just they're not nationally recognized. So you file it into the Patent and Trademark Office and for the copyright to your notes, and you pay a small fee. And so that's how copyrights work. And trademarks also have to be associated with an activity, a business. So it's still good to get an intellectual property attorney to work with when you're doing copyrights and trademarks. And of course, my part of the job is the number 3 down here, which is to try to organize new companies or find an existing company to partner with, and then the licensing officers in the office will then work on those licenses with either the spin out or with a company. So one question I get a lot is why form new companies when there are existing companies with all these resources? And it's actually not an easy answer, because in fact, the technologies get to market a lot faster if you can work with an existing company. They have the resources, they have the ability to deploy, they have their own partners, they've got all the contracts that they need, they have a whole team, they have money. So the reason we do it is twofold. One, it allows us to have local impact. It has the chance to be located in the greater Philadelphia area. It's good storytelling for it, the type of nuanced story like Mick could share around Upright VR, which is the company that Mick is running from out of Temple, has been a lot, is enriching for everyone. So and then thirdly, we can do pretty well from a financial perspective, we can do pretty well, but it also allows us to create community. So there's a variety of reasons to do it, but ultimately my obligation is the technology. I have a friendship with Mick, but I'm not loyal to Mick. My loyalty is to Upright VR with technology. It's not even to the inventor, Jeff Wright. He's my faculty member, but my job is to try to help his technology get to market and provide resources and connections, and to do whatever we can to do that. So any questions at this point? Because I'm going to just quickly go on to show how the process works, but I'm happy to answer questions. Make anything, Andy, anything in the chat?
We just had one from Darshan regarding the Bardol. Like, Darshan, do you want to ask the question now, Todd? Todd, you see his
Otherwise,
question?
yeah, go ahead. Just read it, Andy, if you'd like.
Yeah, Darshan said, looking forward to hearing your take on the impact of the recent Bardol marching rights announcement.
Sorry, guys. I apologize. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah,
yeah,
we can hear you.
Go ahead.
Oh, wonderful. No, I appreciate the conversation so far. It's been great. I just stepped away from the phone. I happen to be walking. But the Beto Act, as it came out,
Yeah.
with Biden's announcement, do you think it's going to have an impact on innovation and or on commercialization? Because I work in the licensing part of that, and I'm usually on the outside. And I can see companies going, I don't want the headaches associated with trying to figure out whether I'm going to be the only one selling my own product. So what do you see from a university standpoint going, it's going to be harder to get someone to in-license our product if there's a constant threat that we might compete with you?
Yeah, it's very, very unlikely that anything will come from this. I'm not even sure from a contractual perspective that, yeah, I understand the need for competition, but the competition is from someone else inventing something better than what I just came up with, right? I don't think, and that's always the risk, right? Why invest in technology coming out of Temple if Penn has something better? But no, I suspect that the government is not going to do walk-in. I think it's just trying to create pressure to have them stop, pressuring them not to allow for some level of pushing for lower drug costs and things like that. So my answer is that I could be wrong here. Of course, no one really knows, but I think the intent is to say, hey, behave yourself, participate. We're happy to engage in these negotiations. But if you really play badly, we're going to start being meaner. And if you think the Democrats play mean, so yeah, so I doubt it will be of much impact, frankly. There's always a little bit of efforts to, no one really wants to see too much regulation in some components, but there's no question $2.1 million per therapeutic therapy for a sickle cell that where 30% of the patients are on Medicaid and they won't pay for that. It's an issue. How do you manage that? I think that's where
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's where the motivation's coming in, but I'm not, yeah. So as we just discussed a little bit, we are a $330 million research endeavor at Temple last year. And that leads to, between 80 and 100, sometimes more. We go through cycles where we see lots of new disclosures, and then that leads to new patents, that leads to new licenses, and so on. And then we sort of go through a dip as the wave sort of travels down the line. And actually, the new innovationist that I'll show you a little bit later, my focus is engaging the next generation of inventors and also to honor innovation regardless of whether or not it's based on intellectual property. Because up to now, our office and my job was focused solely on creating new companies or finding partners for existing intellectual property that percolated through the university. That's not honoring all innovation, things that are occurring in public health or psychology or even the Tyler School. So we're trying to broaden our definitions and engage the entire community. And besides the fact, you never know. There are new pizza parlors opening every day in Philadelphia, and none of them have patents. So we also need to be open to the ideas about businesses that aren't necessarily intellectual property and support those as well. So as you see, the green circles there show the intellectual property component. And then when you get to the blue circle at the bottom, we have a tech portal at Temple. It needs to be updated. Frankly, I was spending so much time trying to launch the Innovation Nest that I had lost track a little bit of some of the new disclosures, but we put up either non-confidential brief descriptions of our technologies that investors and entrepreneurs can see, or existing companies, and they contact us. We then connect them to to either an NDA if they want to get into deep conversation, or we they just want to jump into a license conversation, an option, things like that. So that leads to obviously licensing and partnerships. And then that one, it looks like a little arrow between licensing and partnerships and product development, but that's a really long arrow. I'm sure Mick can talk about that, and I'm sure many of you can. But the part of the circle towards the left side with product development and market launch, this is the part that I have been working hardest with my team to try to align our license with so that we don't inhibit but support the product development and market launch as instead of because oftentimes licenses have milestones and components to them. And if you're interested, I can talk briefly about what goes into a license. Andy, is that of interest?
Yeah, sure, please do.
So there are typically 4 or 5 buckets. There's a yearly fee. Mick could probably do this lecture himself. There'll be a yearly fee. There would be some kind of a royalty arrangement upon sales. There'll be sub-licensing fees. So if the company finds a partner and they license the intellectual property to that partner, that we get some of that action. That's typically where we make most of our money, to be honest with you, because that transaction is actually something relatively painless for the company. They negotiate a sub-licensing fee, and they knowing what that Temple's going to get, say 15 or 20% of that. They just negotiate it to the point where it makes sense for everyone. Then there's also we often, but not in every case, we get equity. At Temple, I've never seen Temple receive more than 10% equity in any deal. So it's typically more likely in the 5 to 8% kind of range. So that also then gives us a chance for a person like myself to serve as a non-voting board seat. So I have the non-voting board seat in about half of my companies. And that also gives me a chance to identify resources for them, but also be alerted in advance to things that are not going well, because nothing goes to plan 100%. So, and then there is there are milestones, and that the milestones, that was the part that I'm talking about, that have to be aligned with the business plan. So getting to know and working with an entrepreneur. So in the process of licensing, there's typically a 9-month to 1-year option agreement to give the entrepreneur an opportunity to build a business plan and work with us, understand the invention, and sort of talk about what's the fundraising, what is the requirement, what's the regulatory pathway, all the kinds of things that might go into the business that will allow them to come back in and say, here's the license that I would like to have, or to negotiate from strength and knowledge the license that they want. And the part of the conversation where I can be helpful at times is to understand when we're talking apples and oranges, because the licensing officer's job is to make sure we get a fair market value. It's by law. A charity such as Temple, which receives federal funding, must get fair market value for its products to a for-profit entity. So you can't use charitable dollars to support for-profit activity where you're giving away the public trust. So that's where the tension comes in the process of the license, is that the licensing officer thinks what he or she has is the best deal and fair market. The entrepreneur's job is to try to get the best deal for the company, because obviously that's what's going to make it most investable and potentially give the best chance for success from a business perspective. And my job is to facilitate communication and to make sure that what the entrepreneur is saying to the licensing officer and the licensing officer's response, they're actually talking about the same problem, because sometimes they misunderstand, and sometimes the process itself becomes stilted. You agree on the amount of equity, then you move into a milestone that the entrepreneur disagrees with a particular milestone, and then say, okay, I'll compromise on that, but I want more equity. Well, we settled on equity. Why are you coming back to that? Well, we're coming back to it because it's one deal. So, and that's so all of these things can be resolved with some level of trust. And it's important for communication. And my job is to create, as Jess described in the beginning of this, creating trusted relationships. I can tell you, we cannot do business with people, entrepreneurs, who are not trustworthy, and they need to trust us. And we want to do a really good job of validating and valuing and making sure the technologies that we're providing in these deals actually do what they're supposed to do. So part of our trust is to make sure that we vet our technologies before we decide whether we want to go forward with them into market. So the rest of the circle here, was that sufficient, Andy?
Yeah, it was great. Thanks, Todd. Yeah.
Thank you. So obviously, revenue comes in at some point. Sometimes it's a little bit of revenue during the blue period through those milestones. Sometimes companies start selling product, and they're not revenue positive, but there's actual royalties returned during the blue period while they're launching, but they're not yet at profitable or ready to sell off the company or move forward. So. So any monies that we get, 40% goes to the inventors at Temple, and the rest of it some of it goes to the department, some of it goes to the school, and I think something on the lines of 5 to 10% of it comes back to the Office for the Vice President for Research. Certain types of deals, equity is held wholly by us. Although we share it with the faculty member, we get if there's real money there, that's very helpful. We will put it back into supporting our programs. So the point here is that this is an iterative process. You can imagine I'm meeting with a faculty member, and we hear what the idea is, and we say, this is really nifty. It looks to be patentable, but you're going to need this data. So I don't know if this is obvious to y'all, but you must be in possession of your invention when you file it. The prophetic patents, the ones where, I have a really great idea, they're very difficult to protect. So in order for them to be really a functional filing, you really need to understand the patent. Your claim sets need to be really precise and good to protect you in court. And once you start to make money, somebody in the woodwork will come out and complain or say it's not a valid patent or blah, blah, blah. It's the most common thing. Big pharma is notorious for that, coming after, smaller companies and saying, hey, we've got a patent on this, or you don't have the right inventors, it's invalid. So, or other types of errors. So it's important to do it properly. But that aside, we will to talk to them about needed experiments, and we'll go back through. So it can go around a couple of times before we decide to file. So I sort of discussed this a little bit, but just for clarity, it has to be a novel idea. It can't be obvious to somebody who is a professional in this space. So, people talk about somebody inventing the chair, and then somebody inventing the rocking chair, right? So was it obvious that the chair could have rails on it that were curved, that when they made up a patent for a 3 or 4-legged chair? And so there's sometimes questions about it, but if you can get a non-obvious ruling, then you can file. So non-obviousness is is part of the nuance of intellectual property, and then the patent must explain how to use the product and how to deploy it. That means it enables the reader to be able to do it. Purposes of patents is to promote the ability to make improvements on on products, but you get exclusivity for the right to explain how it works. So is that a clear concept, or should I repeat that? That the enablement is an important part of it. You must be in ownership of the patent to file it, and you must spend time to explain how it actually works so that you could do it yourself if you're somebody who's in the space. And that's a really critical part. And poorly organized or poorly written patents are are out there, and their value is less if they're really quality products, explaining how to do it, and then it also gives you clear space where your patent ends and where improvements or new intellectual property can be added to it by the company as it progresses with the license. So, and as I mentioned, you can't publish before you try to file. So this is the timing. I don't know if you guys have seen any of these or been involved with projects like this, but you have these periods of time where typically have to respond with whether it's international. The national phase is when you start getting reporting back from other countries, patent offices. Hey, do you want to work? Do you want to file in Switzerland, in Myanmar, in Ghana? Oftentimes the real question comes down to the BRIC countries, and China's obviously had a lot of issues with dealing with international patent and patent protection and respecting patents. So it's always a lively conversation about which countries you want to file in. The intellectual property is owned by Temple. It's assigned to Temple, but we license it to the company. So we're involved with the conversations. The company makes the decisions about where they want to file, but we're obligated to by law to continue to be involved in the conversations about the intellectual property that comes from Temple. That's a bit of a complexity sometimes, but it's the law makes it look like we make the decision, but in fact, we try to empower our companies to decide what their business model is, where they need to file, where they need to protect. But sometimes we have information that would be useful for the company to decide, hey, I really should file in South Africa. They have a major manufacturing in the same space. You want to always protect where somebody could make it, if at all possible. So hopefully that's pretty clear. We've already sort of discussed most of this portion, so I'm going to skip this and get to what we're doing. So what do we do at Temple? And this is where I really come into play. Well, to be honest with you, let me go back up on that a little bit, because I was a faculty member and because I have this a sensibility of understanding what the issues are, I'm often the first person they'll contact. So I'll have a conversation very early, and then I'll point them in the directions of the licensing or intake officers, things like that, but follow the conversation as it goes forward to the point where, okay, it's now ready for me to look for an entrepreneur, post it on a tech portal, and then or engage in one of the ecosystem programs. There are a lot of matchmaking programs out there between people, and companies and technologies that are emerging. And we try to take advantage of them. One is from that consortia that I mentioned called Biostrategy Partners. It runs a program called Germinator, and right now we're running several projects with a company called Fuji Radio, which is a diagnostics company. They are looking for new markers and new diagnostic markers. So we with J&J, I think we ran about 18 projects amongst its members to look for new targets in various therapeutic areas. They have GSK funded about 12 projects through this consortia. So this also helps the technology advance. And oftentimes the company says, "Oh, that's great. When it's ready, let us know." Right. So then we form a company. We may even ask them to be an advisor on the company. So that's part is to make sure you're launching a company and making a product somebody wants to buy. It's the number one problem, right? It's either they don't understand the market, and therefore the complexities of the market, they don't know how to enter it, or there's really no market for it at all. And we were mistaken when we filed and we licensed it, and it turns out that it's too complicated. There's too many barriers to entry. So, but that's the purpose of the option agreement, which gives the period of time to develop that plan and determine if there's a market, and they can just walk away. It's a very modest fees for an option agreement. They're usually exclusive periods, and then the licenses as discussed. And oftentimes, by the way, we would include a license would include a template of a license agreement with the option. So there's time to start those discussions. So perhaps this is also where you guys come in. So what does the license do? It gives it permission to use the intellectual property of the university. As I said, there's fees and components to it. We try to keep our inventors out of the negotiations. We would like to have them have a role in the company as advisors to the technology or as recipients of sponsored research from the company to continue developing new products or answering specific questions investors might have. But we do not generally want our faculty to be on the boards or directors of new companies. They can be for 6 months or a year, like interim chief scientific officer. We understand the need to show investors the level of technical capacity and things like that. But we try not to make that part of the main thing. We do not cap the equity, though, that our inventors can get through a consulting agreement, but we don't want them to be managing the company itself. We want the people who know how to run a business to run the business. And we want them to bring great scientists from outside. We want them to bundle technologies from other universities or other sources. We want a successful company that'll bring the technology to market. And most of the time, inventors are a hindrance. Not in the case for Mick, but oftentimes these people are not business people, and they don't understand where limitation. So by engaging an entrepreneur right off the bat to take this option, and they create the company and then negotiate the university for the license, it disabuses the inventor of the notion that it's their company. It's their invention, but it's not their company. It's a really important thing, and it's really the Temple model that we try to stay with. We are not investigator, inventor driven at Temple. We're technology driven. So there's a difference between how other sort of the cultures of different universities and how much their inventors are playing in the role. I believe that this model will benefit the technology and the company. And we do have some exceptions. If a big investor says we want your inventor on the board because they are world famous scientists and we benefit from it, we'll make those. We'll allow it. Then with every company we create, we have a conflict of interest policy and process. So we put in any equity that they hold into a conflict, and we attach intellectual property agreement to any consulting agreement they have with the company, saying that new intellectual property can't sneak through their consulting role out of the university. So wanted to point out that we also are a member of the Princeton I-Corps, Northeast I-Corps Hub. It's a really fantastic program, and many of the agencies are moving towards an SBIR, STTR model with some kind of I-Corps component. And I-Corps is a way of understanding the market and the barriers to adoption of the technology. And it starts with a regional program. So if it's a brand new thing, the program at Princeton, and by the way, the members of that consortium are University of Delaware, Princeton, Rutgers, Temple, I believe Drexel's just joined Yale, and Lehigh, and a couple of other schools are now. And each year we can add a new one to our hub. It's terrific also, by the way, because we can find entrepreneurs through that group too, just the way we do with BioStrategy partners. That's our biggest hindrance to new company formation, by the way, is getting a qualified entrepreneur to timing. I have a pretty good Rolodex, but it's often the people who are interested in certain areas. They're busy when I contact them. Hey, I got a cool tech in your space. Sorry, I'm running this company. I don't have time right now. So Iyad is in engineering, and he's an amazing faculty representative. Temple needs to run about 10 of these per year to really be functional in these I-Corps program. So here's the splash page of a lot of our companies. Not all of them, but many. So These, over the period of time that I've been here, I think I mentioned we've created something on the lines of 45 companies. I think there are 29 still functioning. Several have gone public or have disappeared. So Express Cells, run by Matt Handel, just recently closed. It was a nifty concept and fantastic technology around rapid development of cell lines that have multiple colors to look at their process, but it was hard for Matt to come up with a scalable model, although he did get decent investment. Other projects like SFA Therapeutics, which is using a natural product or combination of natural products, led to new intellectual property and composition of matter. Composition of matter is where it's a brand new compound, and so you have to go through FDA clearance. He's absolutely clearing psoriasis with no side effects. None of the Skylarry, all these commercials with, be careful, you could get a die of tuberculosis, blah, 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 all these terrible things that you see on TV. SFA is amazing. Ira Spector is running that company. Renovacor, with my mug here, went IPO and has now been purchased by Rocket Pharma. Preventix is an IBD company, came out of pharmacy. I'm just going through some of these some have done very well and some have not done so well. Excision is the one I mentioned before. Upright VR is the company that Mick is running. Onconova is the company that allowed me to come. Melzi is interesting because the invention was developed by a medical student in their 4th year, who was doing surgery as a rotation, and he was complaining that the robotic surgical unit they'd have take a long time finding needles if they broke. And frankly, these robotic surgical units have hundreds of needles going simultaneously, and when they break, you can't close. And so it was taking 30 to 40 minutes of extra anesthesia and operating room time. And he came up with a very simple concept, a sort of a magnet detector, metal detector that can go inside, be sterile, and then with a little picker to take it off the top. It's actually made it go from an average of 30 minutes to 3 minutes to find a lost needle in surgery, which is a huge boon. So there's so innovation can happen anywhere, and we need to be open for that kind of a story. We do have things that are not just medical. QS Energy is a technology where electricity is passed through a oil and large oil pipelines like the Keystone Pipeline and other things in Alaska, where it's cold and it reduces the viscosity of the oil to allow it to pump with less leak, therefore less leakage. And I don't know, it may not be obvious to you, but oil pipelines leak. They are leaking all the time. It's reducing that leakage and allowing it to be pumped from one end to the other with less pressure is a huge boon. So that's a nifty company. But it's had a hard time coming because the price of oil goes up and down, and people who are in the business of moving the oil are reluctant to make expenditures that are infrastructure when they don't know what their price is coming in and price coming out. But ultimately, this technology can work in other types of suspensions. So it turns out, if you pass a similar magnetic field around a blood vessel, you can lower blood pressure, and if you do it around a chocolate pipeline, you can get chocolate to flow with less viscosity, which means you can do things like 3D print it. So that technology has led to 3 new companies from Temple. To look a little bit more at the portfolio in terms of how it breaks out, you can see we have healthcare IT, a fair amount of medical devices, and Thromblex actually has 9 products on the market, and I had something to do with its success by nominating the inventor for a prize at the American Heart Association's regional meeting that attracted a high-end entrepreneur and investors So that they're now racing towards larger and larger sales. In April, the devices were approved for the use of treating pulmonary embolism. Up to then, it was for just DVT. So, and we have the drug developments and manufacturing. So we have a couple of battery technologies that are moving forward. Amatron is a company that removes estrogens from pharmaceutical wastewaters. It's a big problem. Apparently, estrogen and estrogen-like molecules are a common side component in drug manufacturing. So that's the portfolio. Andy, are there questions? Good.
Yeah, we've got a couple in the chat. Thanks, Todd. Another one from Darshan says, based on the experience all of your experience launching companies, when and how do you know that a technology has no legs? Is it purely funding based or something more? And he's sort of drawing on the distinction, the point where you need a patent. So it's got beyond the patent phase.
That's a really great question. And so we tend to file because the hardest thing to know is actually what's the really great new thing, because nobody's invented it before. It's really hard to recognize that a great new technology. It's a little easier to recognize something that's really a dog. But it might have it might be an improvement over something that's already available. It might lead to a license to an existing company. So we'll tend to file a U.S. File. We have group meetings. We discuss every disclosure. It's not easy. It's a very sophisticated question. And the answer is that we do the best we can. It's a little easier to say, first of all, many of the things that are really really crazy ideas that have no data. What we do with the things we wonder about is really sit down with them and talk about the validation. How do you know this is real? And can we talk about or find an entrepreneur or a business, somebody to talk to us about whether there's a market for it? So we tend to do a little bit of grind and homework before we say no to somebody. Hopefully that answered the question. Andy Moore?
Yeah, Mark had a question regarding market launch. Mark, is there anything further on market launch you'd like to get from Todd?
Yeah, I was just curious, what is involved or what services do you provide or support you provide once you have a commercially viable product to get it into the market itself? What resources are available to your group? I was actually on the board with the QED program at the University City Science Center. So I was just curious how you folks approach it.
Yes. So the QED was actually the QED program was a critical component. It's gone now for Temple. We were actually the most awarded university. I think Rutgers may have been the #1 in total, but we were the most awarded in Philadelphia. We loved it because it gave us real life experience. In fact, being a finalist was better than actually getting the money because it actually went faster. The money was tied to a set of milestones that really needed to be revised because by that point in time, it's almost 2 years in. And so the answer is that so regional resources like Biostrategy Partners, which has a program called Practical Knowledge Series that goes from soup to nuts around for entrepreneurs to hear. We are part of Mid-Atlantic Diamond Ventures. I serve on that board. So I get all of my companies who are interested in presenting to MADV, which also has coaching around their pitch deck. We do have a pitch deck support group in terms of talking to them. We have a variety of investors. We obviously also spend a fair amount of time with their intellectual property folks, sitting with the company, making sure that they have an intellectual property plan. So the resources is really mostly just making sure that what they think they're licensing is what they're getting, to making sure that what is as nothing goes to plan, they have a sort of sounding board group of people to come back to and say, hey, I need to adjust the license for the following reasons. My business model is not what I thought it was. So these tend to be living documents. Well, as you can imagine, when we licensed 60 different patents to Excision, we needed to roll them all up into a sort of single agreement, because that became too complicated to manage. That's another example. So the INES that I'm about to talk about really is going to be open for sort of the programming that goes to your question. We're open to conversations. How do you get the community to provide sort of resources and support? We have a match fund that we've depleted at this point, and I'm trying to get it restored for in the next fiscal year. You know, we all went through a difficult period. Temple had a 13% under enrollment last year and we depend on our enrollees at Temple to really give us the cash flow for all the departments. So we were running something in the lines of 40 or 50 million in the red, which is not typical. Typically, also, the university runs in the black, but bails out the hospital. So the hospital is a separate entity, but it almost always loses money because it's taking care of indigent and it's basically City Hospital Philadelphia. And because the government and because insurance companies and because Medicaid things really don't pay for the full service that we're providing, we run in the red there. But we actually ran in the black during COVID, during the pandemic. And why? Because the government paid, and it paid in full, and it paid fast. And but the university was in the red because student enrollment went down. So the hospital helped us. So it's a complicated world, but we are looking now to also potentially provide resources by having some level of match for the entrepreneur. If they come in and say, hey, I got 25K killing me in my pocket, and I'd like to know if the technology can do X, we might be able to match that 25K because it's a $50,000 experiment. It also helps us grow. I love the match fund. I think that we'll be able to do that, but we have to see exactly. It's not unlikely. We have a brand new vice president. They typically are nice and to the new high level leadership, giving them a little bit of runway so they can have their fingerprints on the internal workings. That answer that question?
Yes. No, thank you.
Andy, anything else?
Yeah, I think Mick had a question. Mick, do you want to take your question?
Sure. It's more of a comment than a question, but you mentioned, Todd, that your biggest challenge is in getting qualified entrepreneurs, and it seems like, and one of the reasons that I wanted to have you speak to the group is Beacon is made up of senior executives, and it's a commitment to networking and the go-giver mentality too. So it just seems like within Beacon's ranks, there could be interested in qualified entrepreneurs, or certainly the network of the network of Beacon folks, and it goes toward the question of how do you think Beacon can help? Maybe you haven't thought about it, but is there anything that Beacon can do for you in supporting your program?
I do believe so, and I think that's actually covered in these slides a little bit. So I'll go forward and talk, and we can actually have that conversation. We have now. This is a slightly old slide, and as I said, it's when I accepted the invitation, I was senior director, and now I'm executive director. Opened about 3 weeks ago. It's quite a nice thing. I was hired 10 years ago in March by my boss, Steve Nappy, and he told me in 2 years we'll have an innovation space for you to manage. Now it's 10 years later. It's typical of processes in academia, but it's really beautiful space. Mick was there the other day, and it has both the licensing offices on one end, a large events forum, and you'll see the space in a moment and some pictures, and then some incubator space. This forum is intended for events and support of technologies and engagement with groups like yours. So one, you could hold your meetings when you go back to live, you can hold your events there. And secondly, if there are if we find ways of formally sharing some of our technology, or we have our regular updates, then perhaps there'd be a way for you to come and have meetings. We're going to have like entrepreneur days and things like that, or specific set up specific meetings between new entrepreneurs and the founders of the technology. Really important for people to appreciate the level of scientific value and commitment. And I'll just do a brief segue here. Jeff Wright, the inventor of the technology that Mick licensed, gave a demonstration of Upright VR's technology to the associate deans yesterday or day before. And hearing the level of research and amount of data that he built to understand the deficits in human balance, and how this device that you guys have developed and the software associated with it can help clinicians understand those deficits and make a plan around it, demonstrated the perfect match between a commercial perspective about how can you deploy this for the good of the population, and the unbelievable research that Jeff Wright performed to give us the basis and understanding about how those signals could mean something for the body. So so we're going to have a lot of events at our space, including multidisciplinary programs. Actually, so let me step back before I go to what we're going to do there. This is what we have in the space. We have 3 different conference rooms. We have this central location that holds room for over 100. We have and by the way, everything is named after things around owls, because Temple are the owls. And so the 2 large conference rooms, one is the Parliament and one is Congress, where those are groups of owls. The Roost is the office, the conference room for the tech transfer office. The area, the smaller area in the main room is going to be called the Perch, and so all sorts of places and they can be lunch and learns. So if you guys have individual organizations or companies and you have specialty experience and you would like to have a lunch and learn where you come in and bring lunch, and we invite faculty or entrepreneurs or whomever you would like as your audience, we can set that up as well. So we have 3 types of space in the incubator. The picture at the top there is actually the incubator area. We're going to have space for flex space for groups to take for like $100 a month, relatively cheap. We have even student ventures that are coming through that come in that would be technical companies. We have offices. We have 6 offices, and we have a thing for hoteling, which are like large cubicles, but they'll be assigned, and we're going to be working mostly holding those for international companies. Temple is the home to the Enrich program, which is the soft landing for European companies looking to come to the US. Enrich is a national program written by Blondine Carré, who brought 550,000 euros to the European Commission to help for these European companies to understand the US market. So some of them will incubate here. The Enrich has offices at George Mason in Virginia, down at Duke in North Carolina. They have Northeastern. It's University associated locations, Berkeley in California, other places. So so we will have international companies coming in, and they can come in a space as long as they have a connection to Temple University. That could be a collaboration with a clinician, or it could be a collaboration with a basic scientist to validate the technology. I don't want, and we're not really permitted to have companies that have no connection to the university. And why? Because this was created because they loved what we were doing with the new company formation. They wanted to be sure that we have space for our new companies to go. But I have convinced them, and they do understand the need for this dynamic. First of all, we create 2 or 3, 4, or 5 companies a year. That some of them may not choose to come to our offices for various reasons. The investors often tell companies where they need to go. So we need it. So that's a slow grow. And secondly, having a dynamic with new collisions and new collaborations is always something I'm looking for. My goal is to create this dynamic for innovation to occur by creating unexpected collisions. So there's behind the incubator space. So in total, it's about 8,200 square feet. And behind the incubator space that you're looking for, and looking at that picture on the top, is our two wet labs with cell culture rooms. No equipment in them. The companies will bring their equipment. What was originally budgeted and done was, I thought, unwise to buy a lot of equipment. First of all, technologies rapidly change, and for us to buy equipment that sits there, and so we will contribute to that equipment. You asked the question, what do we do for resources? We may be able to co-purchase equipment or support activities, and then they maybe buy it from us when they leave after fundraising, things like that. So so we have a gene sequencing facility, which is probably not going to be used for gene sequencing. Mostly because when I talked to the big gene sequencing companies who I was looking for people to engage with us, that they're sequencing 10,000 samples at a time, not 10 samples at a time. And so but they would love this space for like sample preparation from patients who in our dental school. And we're located on the fourth floor of the dental school. The underrepresented patients who Temple treats. There are a lot of things there that the world of sequencing is interested in, biomarkers for people for underserved populations and other types of questions. And also the company we were talking to is Helix. They do most of the sequencing of COVID around the country. Temple's also been doing sequencing, by the way. We've now sequenced 2,000 variants of COVID. So there are a lot of variations out there. So it's pretty nifty space. It's very flexible. It has also a data analysis room. So we're hoping, and we are engaging with all the stakeholders of the university so that this space is deployed well. So this is principally my principal job. So you can see where the island is. Actually, it's beautiful granite. You're looking at the design. It's actually a beautiful space. And there's the tech transfer offices, conference room, the couch is yet to be delivered, but it's coming. These pictures are by the designer of the space. So we're doing a snail launch. We're going to have a grand opening, which you'll all be invited to in March. So my goal is to have really engage both external and internal groups to have full level of understanding and celebrating innovation wherever it occurs. So here's the programs that I've so far launched or are in the process of launching. So the folks like Kamal Khalili, who invented the technology for excision, they're nearing retirement. So my first goal is to engage the next generation, and the investigator series will do that. Looking at young folks who are about to get tenured or in the process of looking at tenure, or who have just received a grant or published an important paper, and we're going to ask them 4 questions. The questions are, tell us your journey about how you got here. One that's useful for students and for people out there. Nobody's plan goes to perfect array. I was an immunologist doing research, writing grants. That's not what I'm doing today. How did they end up being a faculty member at Temple? What was their career path? So young people can understand, they can almost use it as a template. Second is like, what's the nature of the work that they're doing and how can it affect humanity? And to generally talk about what they're hoping for from and a bit about the wish list, like if they had a technology or a collaborator that they wish they could talk to, who would that be? So again, I'm trying to create those connections. We're going to be doing multidisciplinary symposia. We did a program on medical cannabis last spring just to get the program going. In this coming spring, we're going to be doing one around the microbiome. But if you guys have suggestions about interesting areas, we're also engaging our faculty and deans to think about what are the multidisciplinary things that we could work on that would, by doing this. So we'll typically have 2 panels. one with a industry/government type of group talking about what are the focus of the funding agencies and the industry partners. Like for instance, J&J is focusing on colorectal carcinoma and infection. They think there's a lead bacteria that seems to be driving a lot of colorectal carcinoma. So that might be an interesting thing for our faculty to hear about. Only reason I know that is because I've selected a chair of that panel to organize for spring. So, and then we have a faculty panel talking about research going on at Temple. The first that panel is going to be chaired by a woman named Chala Tukul, who is studying bacterial amyloids and the role of protecting or inhibiting immune responses in the gut in IBD. So, and then we're going to have pair the inventor and their entrepreneur. So Jeff Wright and Mick Navin. We're going to start with Riaz Bashir, who's Thrombolex and the CEO of Thrombolex, to talk about the journey together, because it's the hardest thing anybody can do is to start a new company and grow it and bring it to market. It's not running a lab, and it's everything. It's human resources. It's a very daunting process, and people should hear, even successful companies like Thrombolex, what they had to do and how long it took them to get money, and what kind of grants did they have, and and how did they go about selecting their vendors so those experiences should be useful for the next generation of inventors. So I mentioned ICOR already. And we're certainly looking for sponsored events. So if you guys are interested in hosting or sponsoring and getting your name at Temple's INES, we're happy to talk to you about that sort of thing. We're also going to be running funding competitions for both student and faculty. Technology will probably separate them to some degree, so students have a chance of winning for some of those events. But we have actually received some funding from a donor to support these funding competitions. So we are also willing to and are working with groups to help people perfect their pitches and have those conversations. So that is the information about iNest, and this is the team. My folks are Julie Stapleton Carroll, who runs the Blackstone Launchpad, but she also helps organize events. And Jennifer Jenkins is my coordinator for events, making sure that we don't double book the space. We're going to have actually a public view in. So if you wanted to reserve space or conference rooms, you'd be able to see what's available. The licensing team is in the middle, and Steve Nappy, who is the associate vice president, he's in charge of the whole group. Jeff Tolliver manages contracts. So when you want to support sponsored research, it would go through Jeff's group. And Nazarene is the woman who provided the miracle of getting us back in compliance with the federal government on the intellectual property disclosure. And Renita makes sure we get bills paid to our intellectual property companies. So that's what I have for you today. I'm happy to answer more questions.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Todd. And definitely, we welcome the opportunity to sort of explore with you how Beacon can collaborate with Temple and the organization.
Absolutely. And I think I heard of Beacon even before Mick's invite. There's a fellow, I think it was David Niles, who is in the real estate world at the time, who said, you should talk to the folks about what Beacon is doing because it's pretty extraordinary. So your reputation is terrific. And I imagine it's relatively exclusive, but if there's ways that we can help you, and happy to make this a two-way street.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.